Hi, I'm Tommy Williams, and I'm a candidate for the Doctor of Ministry program at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. This 20-minute presentation is meant to give a brief summary and outline of the project paper I've been working on for the last year for the completion of my Doctor of Ministry degree. The title of my project is Cultivating Holy Friendships, an Ecumenical Local Cohort Model for Redemptive Social Change. Cultivating Holy Friendships. The premise behind this project is that redemptive social change happens in a network of friendships. These networks can be small, they can be large, they can be families, congregations, neighborhoods, or communities. But the faithful social change, movements for faithful social change, emerge out of a network of friendships rather than out of the single hero or heroine theory of history. Redemptive social change does not happen in a vacuum. That hero-heroine narrative of social change actually rarely holds, and this paper looks deeply at a number of historical examples of faithful social change. And while these movements are certainly led by individuals, high-profile individuals that we see and notice and know their names, these individuals are always surrounded by others. They are products of communities. They are blessed by holy friendships that make them stronger. My project is meant to address a condition, the condition of my own local context, and so in my paper I describe a bit of the condition that I'm trying to address by designing this project, and a bit about the social context of the community to which I am appointed in the place where I live now, which is in Beaumont, Texas. Beaumont, Texas is just like any other community. It has its a long history, it has its challenges, it's had high moments in its history. It's also like any moment in contemporary America, any place in contemporary American life, and that is that people are generally today more socially isolated and alone than they have been in the foreseeable time. There's a lot of research that I detail in the project paper that talks about what many of the researchers have called the epidemic of loneliness. Researchers in the United States and also in Great Britain and other parts of the world have detailed this epidemic where people are feeling more and more isolated from one another. Neighbors don't know neighbors. All social institutions, groups where people belong are declining. There is widespread disenfranchisement in communities. The social fabric that binds communities together is fraying, and that has, and congregations that are not immune to that, clergy are not immune to that. And so what happens then is that clergy are assigned, appointed, or called to a certain community. These clergy are often full of idealism, full of a kingdom vision for their community, but they're also very alone, and they enter into that community alone with all of these hopes and dreams. And when I'm a clergy person, when we show up in these local communities, we find communities of lonely people, people that are loosely connected together, congregations that are already struggling with other issues and concerns with very survival. It's very difficult to get people to coalesce around a certain vision for the community around them. So this project seeks to pull together local ecumenical cohorts of clergy to band together both as a means of addressing their own loneliness and their vocation and their call and their desire for redemptive social change, and by addressing social systemic concerns, community concerns in the cities in which they are serving. Society at large is always in need of redemptive social change, and this time is needed as much as ever. For the project paper, I spent a good chunk of the paper talking about biblical and theological foundations for the project. That is, biblical examples of holy friendship, theological examples in history of holy friendships and the way that shaped faithful movements for redemptive social change. In the early Christian community, it's recounted in the book of Acts chapter 2 after the Pentecost experience. It describes the characteristics of the early Christian community in beautiful form. And in those verses at the very end of chapter 2, the book of Acts, it talks about the way that they care for one another, but also that the way that they cared for one another was a witness to the outer community, and the way that they were community together, quote, engendered the goodwill of all, end quote. So the way that that Christian community was faithful and exhibited holy friendship with each other had a spillover effect in the community around them, such that it engendered and listed the goodwill of the community around them. It wasn't just that they existed for themselves, but the way that they cared for one another then inspired the way that they cared about the community and the way the community viewed the church. Throughout Christian history, there have been beautiful examples that I highlight in the paper in a lot of detail of holy friendships that inspire redemptive social change at scales large and small. The first example that I highlight in the paper that I'll talk about here briefly were the Clapham circles in the 1700s in Great Britain. The most notable member of the Clapham Circle was a man named William Wilberforce. There have been recent biographies about Wilberforce. He was a member of British Parliament who led the movement for the abolition of the slave trade. He was successful in that movement largely because he was formed and shaped and sharpened by a community of friends who gathered at a place called Clapham House. Some of these friends were members of Parliament, some of them were not. But they came together, they prayed for one another. Many of them were influenced by the Methodist movement, by the way. But they gathered together and they supported each other. And in these places, they challenged, they sharpened each other, and they spent time in prayer together and holding each other accountable to to what they viewed as God's vision for the society, which in this case was the abolition of the dreadful slave trade. At the very end of John Wesley's life, the founder of the Methodist movement, John Wesley's very last letter was written to William Wilberforce, encouraging him to keep up the good fight. Another example of holy friendship encouraging people on. The next example that I would cite for us zooms forward to the 20th century, which happens in the late 1920s and early 1930s, and that is a friendship, an unlikely friendship between Dietrich Bonhoeffer, German pastor and theologian, and a young African-American pastor, Frank Fisher, in New York City. We know Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was brilliant young pastor, theologian, German, Lutheran, came to the United States to Union Theological Seminary in the late 1920s in order to do a postdoctoral fellowship. He met at Union Seminary Frank Fisher, who was there as a seminary student. Frank Fisher was a son of a Baptist minister in the southern United States. He migrated up to New York City in order to attend Union Seminary, and he was what we would call now a pastoral intern at the Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York City, in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City. Abyssinian was this growing hotbed of vibrant American Christianity, and in fact, Dietrich Bonhoeffer found there, quote, the most vibrant form of Christianity that he found the entire time he was at Union Seminary. Through this friendship, Fisher introduced him to Adam Clayton Powell Sr., who was the pastor of the church, later Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the pastor of the church. And that church was just a vibrant community of faith that was involved in their neighborhood and really in the broader city of New York. Frank Fisher and Bonhoeffer went on road trips together. Bonhoeffer really saw racism through new eyes, through Frank Fisher's eyes. And their holy friendship continued to inspire Bonhoeffer when he returned back to Germany and Bonhoeffer taught in the underground seminary. Bonhoeffer took with him recordings from the Abyssinian church choir and played them for the underground seminary students back in Germany. Theirs is a wonderful friendship. Frank Fisher has an interesting connection to the holy friendship that I'm going to segue to now. I talk in the paper about a prominent friendship between the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, both ministers in the South who were leaders in the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century. Ralph Abernathy, the connection between he and Frank Fisher is that Frank Fisher was the pastor of the West Hunter Street Baptist Church, died in 1960, and Ralph Abernathy actually succeeded him there and served there for many decades afterward. That's their little connection. Ralph Abernathy and Martin Luther King Jr. were called twin brothers of the civil rights movement by Taylor Branch, a noted historian. Abernathy and King were a pair for each other because they complemented each other. They brought different gifts to this movement for faithful, redemptive social change. Both of them were deeply rooted in their Christian faith. Both of them traveled together. Both of them provided a source of encouragement and inspiration together. There are actually moments in the movement along the way when King becomes discouraged. He's certainly the face of the movement, the charismatic face of the movement. But Abernathy is an organizational genius. Abernathy supports King when King is really low, including at the famous movement in Memphis when King is committed to support the sanitation workers who are on strike for better pay. And Abernathy, King is very discouraged and is debating about whether he'll show up for the rally, and Abernathy tells him he's got to do it. And so Abernathy is there at a very crucial time in King's life and in the life of the movement. But theirs is a holy friendship that encourages one another for redemptive social change. I've also got a photo, and I should have said this earlier, but I have a PowerPoint slide that accompanies this video, and so I hope you'll pull that up along the way here. And if you haven't already, I hope you do that. And in there you'll find photos of some of the people that I'm talking about, and also I've got a photo, a bit of an outline that walks through this presentation. One of the photos that you'll see there is me and a friend who are standing out in front of Abyssinian Baptist Church once when we visited there. All right, contemporary examples of cultivating holy friendship. I couldn't help but name holy friendships that have been a lot to me. I served in Houston, Texas for 9 years with Barclay Thompson and Steve Wells, one an Episcopal priest, one a Baptist pastor. The three of us got into a little holy mischief together there, advocating for refugees and immigrants in Houston, for public education, and a number of other social concerns that we saw as redemptive and faithful. And so in the paper I talk a bit more about that and about our time together. We remain very good friends and care about each other deeply. I had the real privilege a little over a year ago to interview another set of holy friendships that even stretches outside the Christian communion, and that is among three gentlemen who are known in Houston as the Three Amigos. That is Rabbi Samuel Karff, the Reverend Dr. Bill Lawson, Archbishop Joseph Fiorenza. Rabbi Karff was for a long time the senior rabbi at Congregation Beth Israel, the largest Reform synagogue in the southern United States. It's right in Houston, Texas. Bill Lawson at Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church in Houston, and Joseph Fiorenza, and actually a native of Beaumont, Texas, who was for a long time the bishop of the Houston-Galveston Diocese of the Roman Catholic Church. The three of them came together around social issues in the 1970s, 80s, and now the both of them find themselves still working together, even as the youngest of them, I believe, is in his late 80s, and the others are in their 90s, and they're still doing work together for redemptive social change. For the three of them, I got to interview them 15 months ago. It was a sacred privilege to do that. For the three of them, they have been able to unite together around a vision of the common good, that God is about repairing the world, a Jewish theme, and the three of them forged a real friendship around this common vision of repair in the world. And I enjoyed my conversation with them, and truly I see their friendship as a holy one. And in Beaumont, Texas, I'm already making good friends and ecumenical colleagues as I form this cohort, or attempt to. And so you'll see a photo there in the slideshow of my local colleagues here in Beaumont, Texas. So I'm enjoying that connection right now. Let me move on to the project outline. I set about in the project to design this ecumenical cohort of local clergy, and it was the aim in the beginning of the project was to assemble them with a sort of blank slate agenda and to begin building relationships among ourselves, and then stretch ourselves towards issues of common concern in the community. I had constructive strategies I wrote about in the project paper in place to do that through multiple sessions together, ways that we could get to know each other, ways that we could strategize together. And that's how I began the project, and I outlined that in the paper. What I discovered along the way, though, was, we had a little thing called Tropical Storm Imelda, which really rocked our community and slowed down a bit of the pace of my project. And so I had to slow down the pace of that, but I did begin to meet ecumenical colleagues as soon as I arrived here last year. I began to meet with them one-on-one and even formally interview some of them. I also, as a side project, but which was also helpful in this one, was interview my local congregation, Trinity United Methodist Church, and talk with them about what their own vision for the community is and how they see God acting in their lives and how they see our church being called by God to bring a common good, a redemptive vision for the city of Beaumont. So we've been gathering together in listening sessions with the congregation, but I also did that with individual cohorts, with individual clergy that I hope to be a part of this cohort. What I discovered, though, in the course of not only the aftermath of this storm and needing to slow the pace down of this, is that it was very challenging just to assemble people together as a blank slate. I had originally taken my cue from a number of organizations that have done that. They have pulled together a mission and a vision for assembling clergy in a cohort together, and then that clergy cohort comes together and they begin to design the program that they want to be a part of. I've been a part of groups like that, and I cite several of them that I've been a part of or that I've researched about. I cited several of them in my project paper. What I came to learn is that institutions are much more able to assemble people with a more blank slate agenda. Certainly they have a vision and mission for what they want to do, but they assemble those members together by virtue of their resources, their standing as an institution that is able to convene and call together groups of clergy, and they're able to do that in a way that I wasn't really frankly able to do as an individual leader in a community. And so I discovered that really I had to tweak my project along the way and allow a common community CERN to be the convening power for our cohort. And so I shifted gears, and rather than have this blank slate agenda and just assemble people together and have lunch and begin to have these multiple sessions, I learned that really I needed to come around a couple of common social concerns that are I need to get clear about those in my own mind that are really common understood by all in our community, and then just begin to call from there people that want to talk about a particular issue, and then in the course of discussing that particular issue we'll begin to develop our friendship together, and then perhaps that will then translate to future efforts together. I learned a lot in that, and really it took me right back to where I started, because that's exactly what happened with all the historical examples of holy friendship. There were particular causes, issues, concerns that brought people together that then began to translate into deeper friendship and translate over to issues later. Yeah, I even found that in my own connections in Houston. I talked about my friendships there, where we didn't just emerge one day and have lunch together. We started coming around particular issues, and then we developed a friendship from there. So I started to do that as well. Also, I knew and also discovered even more that this cohort must have a shared set of faith commitments and a common vision for the community in order to have a good foundation as a cohort. So in conclusion, I discovered that we must really rely on the Spirit to allow issues to emerge for us that have a convening power to gather people together to forge friendship and trust that potentially translate to other concerns in the future. And we must have that foundation of common faith and a common vision for the community around us. Finally, I would just point you to some resources that were very helpful to me through this project. My bibliography, of course, was very long, but I'll point you towards just a few of those. One is a seminal work by Dietrich Bonhoeffer called Life Together. Another one was the Taylor Branch history that I referred to earlier in this presentation. It's called At Canaan's Edge. There's a wonderful biblical exposition of the book of Acts and the early church on this topic. It's called Prophetic Jesus, Prophetic Church, the Challenge of Luke Acts to Contemporary Christians. It's by Luke Timothy Johnson. I also refer you to The Abundant Community by Scott McKnight and Peter Block, as well as The Republic of Grace, Augustinian Thoughts for Dark Times by Charles Matthews. there are many, many more that I encourage you to pursue. But for now, I want to thank you for viewing this video. I want to thank you for being a small part of my journey as a doctoral candidate, and I want to pray for you in your own local communities that you may find a local ecumenical set of friendships that might give you inspiration for faithful, redemptive social change. Thanks very much.